views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Good evening and welcome to BronxTalk. Every week on this program, it seems, we talk about all the issues that are affecting us as a result of the pandemic. I mean, you start with healthcare. We know about the economy. There are just so many things that we have to consider. One of the things that tonight's guest has thought is very important, that the people who do the work, people who have jobs, who are doing the work, should get paid appropriately. And the Comptroller of the City of New York, Scott Stringer, is our guest, and he's going to talk a lot about that. Also, I have in the back of my mind, what are we going to do after the pandemic eases and how we're going to rebuild New York? Comptroller Stringer is so far an unannounced candidate for mayor, but he seems to have that intention. So I'm sure he has a lot to say about that. Good evening to Scott Stringer, the Comptroller of the City of New York.
Well, Gary, it's great to be on with you tonight. And let me just say that it's very great to be on the show because this is the Bronx community that listens to you for so many years. So it's great to be back.
Well, you know, you've been a great guest, and through the mayoral campaign and on beyond, we hope you'll continue to do that. Absolutely. Anyway, really, let's talk about this prevailing wage thing. And as I understand it, people do the jobs, but they have been cheated because they didn't get the right wage they were supposed to get. And you took that seriously.
Well, part of my job is not only to set the prevailing wage, but to enforce the prevailing wage on various projects. And what we've seen over time is that there are contractors who seek to exploit workers, avoid paying the prevailing wage, actually don't even pay contractor workers at all, and people who did an honest day's work, expecting an honest day's pay, are pushed aside. Many are immigrants, many are people of color, many are people struggling to take care of their own families, and many people live in the Bronx. And so I'm really proud to say that working with our Comptroller's office and the great people there, we've been able to debar 70 contractors who violated prevailing wage, and we've returned millions of dollars to people who thought they were never going to see this money. I've returned $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 to individuals who worked on a project and never got paid. It changed their lives. So every year, especially during Labor Day, we go out and make sure that people know that we're holding millions of dollars of people's money in the Comptroller's office, searching for people who worked on projects and were never paid. Let me just say this, just recently, we've returned $2 million to 100 workers just recently in the midst of this pandemic, which is so crucial for families struggling to pay rent, struggling to help their families. So this is a call to action. This is a moment that I hope we can spread the word, because this is not my money. This is not city money. This is the money of hardworking New Yorkers who got shunted aside by unscrupulous contractors.
And they certainly should get paid. Now, I know your office put together a video, so we're going to show the video, and then I'm going to follow up with just a couple of questions about these companies, how this happens, and then what do we do for the future. So here it is from the office of the Comptroller, Scott Stringer, the whole idea of prevailing wages and what he's calling Labor Week as we get into Labor Day. Let's take a look.
Greetings. This is New York City Comptroller Scott Stringer. I always say that in my office, every week is Labor Rights Week. And as we kick off this year's Labor Rights Week, I am thrilled to announce that nearly $2 million in stolen prevailing wages have been returned to more than 100 workers during the COVID-19 pandemic. The economic fallout of COVID-19 has made this work more important than ever. And I am proud that our redoubled efforts have brought justice during these very challenging times. During Labor Rights Week, our office's Bureau of Labor Law will launch virtual workshops called Know Your Rights in collaboration with labor rights groups, community organizations, the Consulate of Mexico, and the Coalition of Latin American Consulates in New York to promote labor rights, advocate for workers, and raise awareness of wage theft. All events commence on August 31st, and the series will culminate on September 4th. Since 2014, our office has assessed more than $30 million in prevailing wage violations and paid over $15 million to employees who were cheated out of their wages. It has also debarred 60 contractors who took advantage of workers, setting an office record. Workers who believe they may be entitled to unpaid prevailing wages can call the Controller's hotline, 212-669-4443. You can send inquiries via email to laborlaw@controller.nyc.gov or check the Controller's mobile-friendly website at www.controller.nyc.gov/wages.
Well, there you go, Controller. Now, just talk to me about who these companies are. You talked about disbarring companies. I'm presuming these are contracts that were with the city of New York. How do they get in there if they don't have a prospective wage sheet that they?
They're private contractors that build our city, whether it's transit construction or city construction jobs. These are contractors that are supposed to pay an honest wage. And when they don't, we take action. And that's why this Labor Week, get out there and tell the message is so critical to finding people. And I want to say, Gary, we find people. You would think that, well, who's going to remember and how are we going to locate somebody? Well, we've worked with consulates, the Mexican consulate. We've worked with so many different stakeholders. And the way we get people to come forward and say, yes, I was exploited, I owe back pay, is by messages like this, but also working with community stakeholders. And believe it or not, when you work with the community, when you work with the consulates, we're able to find people. You know, in this day and age of Trump, when people are afraid to open their doors because of ICE and other enforcement people looking to throw people out of our country, it's very hard to build that trust and those relationships. And that's why I have valued the collaboration with so many community-based organizations in the Bronx, because we found a lot of folks in the community who were owed back pay.
How do we stop this from happening? Is it more diligence on the procurement end? I mean,
zero
we don't want to do this again.
Zero tolerance. You know, I've debarred more companies than any controller in the history of this office, because I have a zero tolerance for companies that purposely cheat workers out of millions of dollars. And the reason they cheat these workers is because they think they can, because they're immigrants. So there's a language barrier. They think, well, what's going to happen to us? We just stiff them and nothing happens. Well, that's not true. Our office has stepped up and we have created a zero tolerance process. As you saw from the video, we're working with Attorney General Letitia James. We're working with Kyle Bragg and 32BJ. And we are building those political partnerships as well to make people understand that you pay people for the work they do. And I have to say, I've had a lot of joy and a lot of moments as controller that I never thought I would ever have. There is nothing like refunding or getting back someone's money and handing a $50,000 check at holiday season. The look on the face just says it all, the work we do. So, you know, Josiel Estrella from our office, Will Giron, our controller leadership, they're in this fight for the right reasons. And I'm glad to have their back when they go after these companies.
And talk about joy handing it in this day and age when everybody is strapped. I mean, that's why
this moment is so critical, because we have been able to return $2 million. We have identified 100 employees, but we're just getting started. This actually matters more than ever before because of the pandemic, because people don't have access to jobs or resources. And this money could be a life changer for kids going back to school, parents who are struggling, people who, you know, may have COVID, or a family member has COVID. And so this really matters to people.
Matters. Food. Start with food. But at the end of the video, there's the phone number, and we'll put that back up on the
Thank
screen.
you.
So anybody else who thinks, hey, wait a minute, I didn't get what I deserve, you contact the controller's office and take care of it. I really want to talk about, and we touched on this the last time you were here, about after the pandemic, as we begin to rebuild. And I want to tell you my thoughts, and of course, I'm a pro-Bronx guy. I think this is going to be a great opportunity for the outer boroughs because the base of the economy has been in Manhattan. We know that, but that's not doing so well. I think this is a great chance for small businesses to rise up and say, wait a minute, we've got to redefine how we're going to do the economy of the city. You just put out a Save Small Business report. I want to have you define what you discovered and what the opportunities are as we unfold and reload after this very difficult time.
Well, you know, it's really amazing that in the midst of a pandemic, Wall Street continues to do well, and some of the biggest companies in the world are just gaming this system. So as controller, I don't worry about Wall Street as much as I do worry about Main Street. And our Save Main Street report is a serious attempt to create a roadmap for how to slowly turn back on the economy using medicine and science as its guide, but opening back the economy for retail, small business, the people who put their heart and soul in creating neighborhoods and stores around our boroughs. And you're absolutely right. This is an opportunity for the Bronx and for Queens. The neighborhoods that were hardest hit by COVID, we now have an obligation to invest in healthcare, invest in small business development, invest in safe housing. This is going to be the challenge going forward. It's not about turning on the economy. It's actually about reimagining the city and who this economy is going to work for. And I think it's time that we recognize what I've talked about for years as controller. This is actually a 5-borough economy now. It isn't based in Manhattan Central Business District. It is a 5-borough economy, and we should own up to it and respect it. So we need to create more transportation hubs and more opportunity for transit. We have to get rid of those transit deserts. We need more busways and bike lanes and create opportunities for seniors to have walkways. This is the challenge. The other challenge is we got to get off the backs of our businesses. So many small businesses open with a dream and life savings that they saved. Banks don't lend to a lot of businesses. So people save money to be an entrepreneur. And the day they open their business, and I'm a former borough president, I got invited to a lot of small business openings. But after the politicians leave, you know who comes? The city agencies, the tax people, the people who fine you, harass you. And we actually just drive businesses, small businesses, out of the city. Here's something that may surprise you, if I may. Pre-COVID, our retail space vacancy rate doubled to 11 million square feet. From 2007 to 2017, we doubled the amount of vacant space in our city. There are whole corridors throughout our city that are basically shut. No businesses exist. So we've got to think about how we incentivize businesses to stay, but also to go into these neighborhoods.
I look at something like Fifth Avenue and many of the apartments that are now vacated, and certainly the office buildings. I mean, many of the businesses, we know what the bigger ones and even smaller ones are saying, you know what, they're working from home, let's keep it that way. Now that also hurts the coffee shops all through Manhattan and all that. My thought is that it would be nice if Bronx people, again, I'm always championing the Bronx.
You are the Bronx guy.
Yeah, that's it. But if Bronx businesses could then move into Manhattan and say somebody who's got a coffee shop maybe on Burnside Avenue, then, you know, finds a way to get into Manhattan, and all of a sudden that economy builds a little bit for the outer boroughs. Am I dreaming, or is this
There's a lot of great ideas, although I would argue that a Bronx coffee shop for the Bronx is a Bronx coffee shop for the Bronx. Again, I don't think, and I say this as the former Manhattan Borough President, I don't think to succeed, you have to take your Bronx business and move to Manhattan. I think you can succeed and should be able to succeed in the neighborhood that you come from or the neighborhood that you believe in. So I want to just make that clear. The question is, how do we resource help for small businesses. And our report is very detailed in the kind of things that we should do. If we have vacant stretches or vacancies, we need to create tax incentives so businesses to take a chance and move into these vacant properties. If we create a moratorium on fees and fines and all the nicks and knacks that just run a business cash flow into the ground, that should be implemented, especially post-pandemic. We've got to be more tech savvy with our small businesses. A lot of what we learned through this experience is, deliveries matter, and expanding your local retail space into the world of online shopping is real, but many businesses don't have the technology or the resources to create a platform for that. Why don't we have the Small Business Administration create a tech corps so they can go out, knock on the doors of every business and say, look, here's what we can do to help you. Don't come to us, we're gonna come to you. And I think there's a lot of strategy that has to be implemented post-pandemic.
So we brought it up. Let's talk about the local Bronx coffee shop or deli, or somebody who's serious about running his or her business and wants to do a good job. You're saying that if you were mayor, if we're going there, that we've got to lower the fees, get off their backs, et cetera, et cetera. Does that cost the city money, and does that ultimately have to be replaced?
But the purpose of a fine or a fee is not just to drain a business. I think there should be a moratorium for 30 days when there are violations in a business. Give the owner a chance to fix it. Why are we trying to shake down the legal shakedown of these businesses is legendary. The rent's too high. The businesses are being inundated with fines and fees and harassment. Even the move to outdoor space, which was obviously a lifesaver for so many coffee shops. It was safe to do. It made sense. There was no rhyme or reason to so much of what these city agencies were asking these businesses to do. So they would build partitions because they wanted to be safe and move their businesses outside. And the city government stumbles to tell them, well, this isn't what we want. You should do it this way. Meanwhile, it's costing those small businesses tens of thousands of dollars to comply with outdoor dining, and they have no income. So I guess the purpose of Save Main Street is to put a marker down and say, we're going to turn this economy around. We are going to win this battle. But let's imagine the city a little differently. Let's invest in the mom and pops. Let's invest in young entrepreneurs. And let's do this with all the tech savvy and all of the resources we can muster. Because when you put small businesses in communities, they hire locally. There's more diversity. And let me tell you something, when the tourists come back, they just don't want to go to the Statue of Liberty. It's nice to go there. They want to see what's happening in the Bronx. They want to
Bronx.
when I was growing up uptown, no one came to visit us, right? But now everyone wants to visit us. So let's show them what we got.
I want to ask you about the outdoor dining. Is there a way to make this permanent or semi-permanent? I mean, and also it de-emphasizes cars, which is something we'd like to do. The fact that we've been able to do this on such a global scale in New York is a very good sign. How long lasting is this concept?
A lot of this could be forever.
Really?
We have to reimagine our transportation network, invest in busways, buses, invest in walkways and bus lanes and bike lanes, and create real opportunity for people to get around differently. We shouldn't just stop with coffee shops and restaurants and bars. We should expand and move retail out into the street where appropriate, especially during those good weather days. I think we should have outdoor learning now in the midst of COVID, because one of the things science tells us, which is pretty set, is that when you have two people outside in a mask, we're strong, and the rate of transmission is negligible. So let's use science to build a new network of businesses and entrepreneurship in a city that always is changing. We, in the Robert Moses era, and from the Cross Bronx, where I grew up in, with Washington Heights, we were all, we all felt that there were these highways on top of our communities, right? And now we know that that has to change, that we can't just invest in the car culture, but we have to invest in what I believe will be the pedestrian city that will spur people to come here and never leave here.
I want to ask you on that line, you have a proposal, which actually I understand just came out the other day, about free city bike memberships for high school students. And then along with that, carving out districts around schools that would be friendly for, a bicycle program. Just talk about that. And then I want to ask you some follow-up about that.
First of all, the proposal also comes from the fact that for me, sort of a rite of passage as a kid was getting a bike. I don't think, we adults truly appreciate the mobility that gives children, even if that bike ride is just around the corner, right? And as you get older and you look at some of the challenges with mass transit, giving a high school student the mobility and a safe way to get to school. One, it's healthy, causes less pollution, gives kids a sense of their own time, their own ownership. And we create a network for kids that's safe because they're in a protected bike lane. And we don't create a transportation system for those can afford bikes or those that can't. And let's use City Bike and City Bike membership for these kids. And let's do it in partnership with some of our business leaders who would love to contribute to the city. I think this is a win. We want to start with 50 schools, 1.5 miles. You don't want to make a proposal that's never going to happen. But this is something that we could ease into over time, and I think it would benefit a lot of kids.
One of the things you do say in the City Bike proposal is philanthropic partners. The question I do have is the idea of carving, you say 1.5 miles around high schools. There's been a lot of difficulties getting communities, Morris Park, and now there's a proposal out for East Tremont Avenue to do, these road diets. Have not been well received. Many of the business districts say, you know what, we can't do deliveries, there's not enough parking, et cetera, et cetera. Are people going to see this as a win-win, or do you expect some of the community boards are going to say, you know what, it's a nice idea, but I hate to say it, not in my neighborhood?
Well, one of the things that we have to do in city government is listen to the community boards and listen to people with different views, and then come to a way of creating a compromise that allows for transportation alternatives to happen, but also making sure that there's community buy-in. We don't do enough of that. I always believed in the community boards. I still do. I served on a community board. I was the first teenager ever appointed to a community board by Percy Sutton, then the Manhattan Borough President. So I believe that you engage in communities. But look, I'll give you an example. I went to Kennedy High School, right? So at Kennedy, you have a huge parking lot, right? And rather than park cars there, could you imagine kids coming in and going to school in the morning? Now there's two entrances to Kennedy. There's the Hill, right? And then there's the Bronx entrance, right? So you got the Marble Hill entrance. So don't take your bike up the hill in the morning, right? Go a little farther along and then go right in, put your bike to a bike rack, and you're there.
I think we can figure it out in a way that will really take a new look at the city. One of the things that you talked about also is outdoor classrooms and the reopening of schools. It's created such a problem because it does not seem to be a consistent plan from City Hall. So everybody's kind of figuring it out. If you were mayor, if you are in a position to make a decision or advise, what would you recommend for the reopening of schools?
Well, look, as controller, I have weighed in saying that safety was paramount as we opened schools. People forget that a lot of our teachers caught COVID and died because the mayor shut down the schools too late, and he's been too slow to reimagine a learning in this COVID time. I give a lot of praise to the teachers and Mike Mulgrew for demanding a higher standard of testing and accountability when it comes to opening schools. We see what's happening with our colleges, and the mayor has just simply been slow. What the Department of Education is doing, parents have no idea. Now, how do I know this? Well, it's not just in my role as oversight as the oversight person, but I have a third grader coming into public school, a second grader coming into public school. My wife are dealing with this every single day, and we do not even to this moment know what remote learning we're getting, what blended means. There's been very little back and forth with parents and teachers. It's been an outrageous mess. And I think that this is not the way we treat our school kids. Look, we spent a lot of time talking about outdoor dining, and we were able to open it. But while we were talking about outdoor dining, we never talked about outdoor schoolyards. I calculated that there's 30 million square feet of open schoolyard space. Much of that could be used for outdoor learning. So when the father on a Bronx Zoom that says to me the following, hey, controller, I have 2 pre-existing COVID conditions. If I get COVID, I could really die. I also have 2 young children the same age as your kids. And my wife is a special ed teacher going back to the school system. DOE has not created a safe space for this person. He asked me, what do I do? Well, my first response is protect yourself and your family.
Of course.
But there has to be other options. Now imagine taking your kid to outdoor learning. That automatically becomes a safe space. It's not perfect, but every study shows that outdoors is the safest place to be in a pandemic.
You may or may not know, I'm the son of a former high school principal and the son of a former director of an early childhood nursery school. So the whole notion of education is very, very
Did
interesting.
you go to the school your father was a...
No. He worked in the former James Monroe High School, and I'm a DeWitt Clinton boy.
That's good for you.
Nonetheless, I do want to ask you about the race for mayor. We've talked about it, kind of offhandedly here. It is obviously very serious business. How big is ethnicity going to play in this? I mean, people like Eric Adams, and now there are women who are saying, we want to run, and there's certainly in this city something to be said. Is it a tough haul for, frankly, a white Jewish candidate to say, well, wait a minute, I understand those issues too, especially in this very volatile climate?
Look, anyone who aspires to be mayor can't be mayor based on who you are, what your ethnicity is. The beauty about New York City, especially with this new ranked voting system, is you have to campaign in every neighborhood, in front of every group, people with all different backgrounds. I would not have been able to serve this city as controller and be the highest vote getter over the last 8 years citywide if I did not have a record or the ability to talk to everybody in this city. And my mayoral campaign, when it's announced, I don't want to tip it off on the show tonight.
I love the exclusive.
I'm not giving it to you. But I want to be able to make that appeal. I want to remind people from where I come. Growing up in Washington Heights, the Bronx is very much part of my family's DNA. My stepfather, Carlos Cuevas, is actually former deputy borough president of the Bronx. My mom was a city councilwoman in the 70s in Washington Heights. And my cousin, Bella Abzug, actually ran for mayor back then. And so I feel very connected to all parts of the city. And I'm going to run, that kind of race if I get in the race, talking about affordable housing, social justice, Black Lives Matter, talking about a real agenda that speaks to the economic viability of communities that have never been fully invested in. And I'll let the voters decide who's the best qualified for mayor in these tough financial times, and we'll respect that decision. I've run very competitive races in my life, and the voters always put you to the test. What's your record? Where do you stand for? What do you believe in? And Bronx voters are tough, but they're very fair. And I think I'm going to get a real good shot.
That's a fine way to conclude the program. Thank you very much, Scott Stringer, the Comptroller of the City of New York. And we'll see you around town. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gary.